While repairing the power lines in my parents' basement, the electrician looked ashen and shaking. He whispered, "Grab your stuff and get out right now. Don't tell your parents." I glanced down into the basement horrified and immediately called the police. Can you imagine finding out the people who were supposed to love you most were actively trying to destroy you? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I thought my life's greatest tragedy was my dad leaving my mom, but that was just the prologue. The real nightmare began the day I opened a forbidden basement door and stared straight into the face of a terrifying ritual, a plot to erase me from existence. Hello, I'm Jacob Caldwell, and I'm 24 years old. For years, I felt like a forgotten puzzle piece in my own family, always on the outside looking in. Now, as I sit in my small Portland apartment, watching the rain outside, I realize just how warped everything became. My story really starts back in that 3-story craftsman house in the Portland suburbs. We weren't rich, but we never wanted for anything. My dad, Samuel, he was 52, a tall man, deep voice, always had this air of authority. His eyes were so sharp, they felt like they could see through anything, yet he never really saw me. He was swallowed by blueprints, business meetings, and these grand dreams of expansion. That ambition, I believe, was what drove him and my mother, Monica, apart. Mom, she was gentle, soft brown hair, a smile as warm as autumn sun. She loved me, I knew it. She'd spend hours telling me fairy tales, stroking my hair during those scary nighttime storms. But their marriage? It was a house built on sand. Beautiful from a distance, but one big wave could bring it all crashing down. I still remember her sitting silently in the kitchen, eyes red, while Dad grumbled about money. I was just a 10-year-old boy, clutching my worn teddy bear in bed, my heart tight with every argument that echoed through those thin walls. Then, the wave hit. I was 10 when my parents officially divorced. I can still see Mom on the sofa, a small suitcase at her feet, her hands trembling as she pulled me into a tight embrace. "Jacob, you are everything to me," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. But the court didn't see it that way. They gave custody to Dad, stable job, nice house, promises of a better life. Mom, with her meager part-time job, didn't stand a chance. She left to live with my grandparents a few hours away. When that door closed behind her, a piece of my heart just tore. I stood there, frozen, watching her fade into the distance, wondering if I'd done something wrong to make her leave. From that moment, I shut down. I wasn't the laughing boy who ran around the backyard anymore. I started seeing the world as fragile, like everything I loved could vanish at any moment. Dad? He barely seemed to notice. He was too busy with work, with rebuilding his own life. To him, I was just a small detail in his grand plan, one he didn't need to pay much attention to. 2 years later, when I was 12, Serena entered our lives. She was much younger than Dad, barely in her 30s, with glossy blonde hair and a smile that always felt insincere. She charmed Dad, made him laugh in a way I hadn't seen since Mom left. But her gaze towards me? Always cold, like she was looking through me. "Jacob, are you okay?" she'd ask, but the words were just empty. Just a question to fill the silence at family dinners. Dad changed. He became dependent on her, letting her decide everything, from schools for their 2 kids, John and Lily, who were 12 and 14 years younger than me, to trivial things like what to buy for dinner. John and Lily were adorable, I won't deny it. John loved soccer, Lily would snuggle up during cartoons. But I couldn't shake the feeling I was an outsider in my own home, a ghost quietly passing through hallways where my mother's laughter once echoed. That 3-story craftsman house, my childhood home, now felt heavy, like an invisible fog had settled in. The basement, though, that was the place that really unsettled me. It lay deep underground, accessed by an old wooden staircase descending into darkness. Musty smell, water seeping through the walls, bone-chilling cold, it always made me shudder. As a kid, I was curious, but Serena, from the moment she moved in, absolutely forbade me from going down there. "It's dangerous, Jacob," she'd say, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. Dad never objected. And I, a 12-year-old, Didn't dare question it. But every time I passed that door, an inexplicable unease pricked at me, like something was lurking in the shadows. The years that followed were marked by loneliness. I learned to hide my emotions, to smile when Serena asked about me, to nod when Dad talked about his company. But deep down, I always felt I didn't belong. My only solace? Phone calls with my mother. Monica, though far away, was a light in my darkest days. I'd call her on weekends, telling her about school, my dreams, the sorrows I couldn't share with anyone else. "You're stronger than you think, Jacob," she'd say, her voice warm through the phone. Dad, thankfully, never forbade me from contacting her. Maybe the only thing he did right by me. Those conversations were a balm, but they couldn't fill the void. Dinner at home was Serena's domain. Perfectly arranged dishes, polite but empty words. John and Lily laughed. Dad nodded along, engrossed in his phone. And me? I just sat there, swallowing bites of food that had no taste. I was no longer part of this family. Serena always found ways to push me to the sidelines. I overheard her once, talking to Dad in the kitchen. "Jacob's grown up. He'll manage on his own." Her voice was soft, but the coldness cut deep. Dad just mumbled in response. He'd chosen her side. My teenage years passed quietly. I focused on school, on books, on dreams of a future where I could leave that house behind. At 18, I did. I went to college in Portland, started living on my own. But even after leaving, the memories of that house and the dark basement, they haunted me. I had no idea that years later, that very basement would reveal a horrifying secret, forcing me to see my entire life in a completely different light. Now, at 24, freshly graduated, I live in a small rented apartment near downtown. The smell of coffee, the car horns, the frenetic pace of city life, it's my world. It's not spacious, just enough for a bed and a desk crammed with books. I work part-time at an old bookstore and get a modest allowance from my mother. Monica is still my anchor. Every month, a little money, a hastily written letter. "You'll find your path, Jacob." I keep those letters in a small wooden box, a reminder that someone out there truly cares. I visit her often, those weekends a balm for my soul. Sitting in her warm kitchen, sipping tea, listening to her stories, I feel like myself again. With Dad and Serena? Different story. I kept my distance, only visiting the old house occasionally, usually when John or Lily texted me. My relationship with Dad felt like a fragile thread. Serena still played the perfect stepmother, polite inquiries, calculated smiles. But I knew beneath that facade, there was nothing but distance. Then, a few months ago, things started getting strange. My body no longer felt like my own. Sudden headaches, hammering at my temples. Some days, I'd wake up dizzy, the world tilting. A persistent, inexplicable fatigue clung to me. I'd always been healthy, rarely even a cold. These symptoms worried me. I went to doctors, underwent tests, brain scans, blood work, the works. Nothing. "Probably stress, Jacob," the doctor said, handing me supplements. I took them religiously, but nothing changed. The exhaustion persisted, an invisible shadow. Around the same time, Serena suddenly became attentive. More frequent phone calls. Her voice syrupy sweet. "Jacob, it's been a while. Why don't you join us for dinner this weekend?" Each call left me surprised and suspicious. I wanted to believe she was sincere, that after all these years, she genuinely wanted to mend things. But every time I heard her voice, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I started visiting more often. Partly for Serena's invitations, partly to see John and Lily. Dinners were in the familiar dining room, warm glow, aroma of food. But every time I sat at that table, I noticed a strange feeling. The food, though meticulously prepared, sometimes had an odd taste. Not spoiled, but something indescribable, a faint metallic or chemical undertone. I once asked Serena about a dish. She just smiled, said it was a new recipe. Dad, as usual, paid no attention. John and Lily, oblivious, laughed and chatted. I was the only one holding my spoon, feeling like I was swallowing unease with every bite. That feeling grew stronger whenever I stayed overnight. Some nights, I jolt awake to strange sounds echoing from the basement. Clanging metal, like someone dragging something heavy. Then a sharp, acrid smell, like incense mixed with something chemical, would drift under my door. I'd lie there, heart pounding, straining to listen. But when I stepped out, the hallway was dark and silent, as if it had all been my imagination. The next morning, I'd try the basement door. Always locked tight. I asked Serena once, trying to be casual. "It's nothing, Jacob," she said, her eyes flickering over me like lightning. Just for safety. Those visits took a toll. The headaches became more frequent, sometimes so intense I had to lie down, clutching my head in the dark. Dizziness, fatigue, that unnamed heaviness clung to me. I started tracking my symptoms, trying to find a pattern. Was it stress? A bad diet? But deep down, a vague instinct began to grow. Something was profoundly wrong in that house. In the meals. In Serena's glances. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was blowing my loneliness out of proportion. But the instinct clung to me, a whisper in my mind, urging me to be careful. Weeks passed. I tried to focus on my life, job interviews, extra shifts. But every time I thought about the old Craftsman house, my heart raced. I started avoiding visits, making excuses. Then one Saturday afternoon, tidying my apartment, I realized I'd left important personal items at Dad's house, university documents, an old camera. I hesitated. The family was away on a trip, the house would be empty. But I decided to just stop by, grab my things, and leave quickly. The Portland sky was overcast, heavy clouds threatening rain. I drove to the Craftsman house. The eerie quiet hit me immediately. No Lily's laughter. No Dad's grumbling. No trace of Serena's saccharine voice. The family was on vacation. I hadn't been invited. A pang of hurt crept in, though I told myself it didn't matter. I unlocked the front door. With the spare key Dad had given me. The house was silent, save for the steady ticking of the wall clock. I went straight to my old room. On the dusty desk, I found my folder and camera. As I reached for them, my eyes caught a framed photo on the bookshelf. Dad, Serena, John, Lily, all beaming in some summer park. I wasn't in the picture. A chill ran down my spine. I stood frozen, my chest tightening as years of being pushed to the margins flooded back, heavy and suffocating. I shook my head, stuffed the items into my bag, ready to leave. That's when the lights flickered and went out. A sharp click. The house plunged into darkness. I stood still, my heartbeat thundering. Outside, rain began to patter, but no storm, no lightning. The electrical system had failed. I pulled out my phone, flashlight on, and checked the breaker panel. Everything seemed fine, but no electricity. Muttering a curse, I knew I couldn't leave the house like this. I found a local electrician, Mike, a middle-aged man with a gruff, warm voice. "I'll be right over, kid," he said. Mike arrived in 15 minutes. He checked the hallway panel, shaking his head. "Must be an issue with the main system," he muttered. "Do you know where the main electrical box is?" I pointed to the basement door, my heart suddenly racing. "Down in the basement," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I don't go down often." Mike raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. He walked to the door, inspecting the shiny lock. "Locked up this tight? You got treasure down there or something," he joked. I could only manage a weak smile. In my mind, Serena's warning echoed, "It's dangerous, Jacob. Don't go down there." As a child, I'd obeyed, not out of fear, but to avoid conflict. But now, standing before that door, a cold shiver ran through me. Something wasn't right, and I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. "Should we wait for my dad?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I mean, he might know more." Mike shrugged. "You can wait if you want, but if we don't fix this now, the house will be dark for days. I just need to check the box. Won't take long." He was right. I took a deep breath. "All right. I'll come with you." Mike nodded, pulling out heavy-duty bolt cutters. The grating sound of metal on metal pierced the quiet, sending goosebumps across my skin. With one strong twist, the lock snapped open. The basement door creaked open, hinges groaning like a long-imprisoned lament. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying a thick, musty odor mixed with something else. Sharpened, acrid, like dried blood blended with burning incense. My throat tightened. A chill pricked my skin. We descended the old wooden staircase, step by step. The weak beam of Mike's flashlight barely pierced the thick darkness. "Electrical box is probably around here somewhere," he muttered, but his voice trembled slightly, as if he, too, sensed the wrongness. I didn't respond. My gaze was drawn to a corner where my flashlight beam landed on a rough wooden table covered with a black cloth. On it were half-burned black candles, their wax hardened into long, dripping streaks like dried tears. At the center of the table sat a small glass jar filled with a dark red liquid that glinted under the light. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and caught a sharp, unmistakable smell. Blood. Next to the jar was a crude cloth doll, no bigger than my hand, pierced with rusted pins. On its fabric face, the word Jacob was clumsily stitched in red thread, like a curse etched into being. My breath caught. The air in the room seemed to tighten around my throat. "Good God," Mike whispered, his flashlight freezing on the table. I turned to see him step back, his face pale. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice shaking. I could only nod, words failing me. On the table was also a small wooden box, its lid open, revealing tiny milky white animal bones, perhaps from a bird or a rat, mixed with charred paper talismans covered in strange symbols. My head spun, as if I'd stepped into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I swung my flashlight to the wall and my heart stopped. The light fell on a photograph. It was me, an old picture from college, taken at a school picnic. I was smiling, carefree and naive, unaware that this photo would end up here, in this basement. Around the picture, a circle had been drawn in red paint, surrounded by bizarre symbols, as if someone had deliberately marked me. Nearby, on a wooden shelf, an open notebook lay sprawled, filled with handwritten scrolls. My name, Jacob Caldwell, repeated over and over, like a relentless curse. "You need to call the police, Jacob," Mike said, his voice barely a whisper. "This isn't normal. I've never seen anything like this." He took another step back, eyes wide with fear. I wanted to reassure him, but I couldn't. The pieces in my mind began to click together, forming a horrifying picture I didn't want to believe. The headaches, the dizziness, the unexplained fatigue, they weren't random. The meals at Dad's house, that strange metallic taste. Serena's probing gaze, as if she were sizing me up, waiting for something. The nights I heard noises from the basement. The times I saw her slip down here in the middle of the night. All those details I dismissed as imagination now stood out, clear as day. Serena. My stepmother. She wasn't just distant. She was doing something far more sinister. A dark ritual. A curse. A plot to destroy me. I stood there, frozen, my trembling hand clutching my phone. My heart pounded as if it might burst. I wasn't just the abandoned son, pushed to the edges. I was the target of something dark, malevolent, incomprehensible. I looked back at that cloth doll with my name stitched on it, feeling like someone was squeezing my heart. Why? Why was Serena doing this? And Dad, did he know? Was he part of this scheme? I pulled out my phone, switched on the camera, and started taking pictures of everything. The table with the candles and glass jar. The doll. The photo on the wall. The notebook filled with writing. Each snapshot was a piece of evidence, a way to preserve the truth before it could be erased. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I knew I had to act. I couldn't let fear consume me. Mike stood behind me, still in shock. "Jacob, we should get out of here," he urged. "It's not safe." I nodded, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. One question echoed in my mind, relentless. Why do they want to destroy me? I thought of my father, how he'd become a stranger. I thought of Serena, her fake smiles and cold eyes. I thought of John and Lily, innocent siblings who likely knew nothing of the darkness enveloping this family. I turned and climbed the stairs, each step heavy, as if dragging an entire world behind me. Mike followed, silent. When we emerged, I closed the door, but the sense of dread clung to me. I knew I'd just uncovered a secret I couldn't unsee. The Craftsman house, once my home, now felt like a trap. And I, without a doubt, was the prey. I stared at the photos on my phone. My legs trembled. Mike stood a few feet away, clutching his toolbox, his face still etched with shock. "Jacob," he said, his voice firm. "You need to call the police right now." I nodded. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Taking a deep breath, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm female voice answered. I cleared my throat, trying not to stammer. I'm Jacob Caldwell. I'm at my father's house in the Portland suburbs. I just found something strange in the basement. There are things. I think they're related to some kind of cult or something dangerous. Please come quickly. My voice faltered, but I managed to describe what I'd seen. The doll, the jar of blood, the symbols. The operator paused, then asked a few questions. Mike gestured for the phone. I'm Mike, the electrician, he said, his voice steadier than mine. I can confirm what he's saying. Everything down here is very wrong. You need to send someone now. Mike's confirmation seemed to prioritize the call. The operator instructed us to wait outside and not touch anything. Mike and I stepped out into the front yard, standing under a gray sky where a light drizzle fell. I clutched my phone, the photos still open, as if they were the only proof keeping me from doubting myself. Mike said nothing, just stared down the street, but I could feel the tension in his every movement. Less than 20 minutes later, a police car pulled into the driveway. 2 officers, Harris and Lopez, stepped out. You're Jacob Caldwell? Harris asked, his hand resting near his holstered gun. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, that's me. I called 911. There's something really strange in the basement. I need you to check it out. Harris raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Lopez. Strange how? Lopez asked, her tone carrying a hint of skepticism. I understood. My story sounded like a low-budget horror movie. There's a doll with my name on it, symbols on the walls, and a jar that looks like it's filled with blood, I said, showing them the photos. Harris glanced at them, but didn't seem entirely convinced. Could be someone's prank, he said calmly. Or some weird art project. We'll check it out, but stay calm. Blood rushed to my face. This isn't a prank. I insisted, my voice hardening. I'm not imagining this. Please, just go down there and see. Lopez nodded, gesturing to Harris. All right, lead us down. I took a breath, opened the front door, and guided them to the basement. Mike followed, but kept his distance, clearly not wanting to go back. The wooden stairs creaked. The musty smell mixed with that sharp incense hit me again, sending a shiver through me. I turned on my flashlight, illuminating the path. When we reached the basement, I pointed to the wooden table draped in black. Harris and Lopez swept their flashlights around the room, and I saw their expressions shift from skepticism to outright shock. Harris paused at the table, his light falling on the doll with my name. Jesus, he muttered so low I barely heard him. Lopez stepped closer, eyeing the glass jar with its dark red liquid, then turned to my photo on the wall, encircled by red paint and strange symbols. She exchanged a look with Harris. This time, there was no doubt. This isn't a prank, Lopez said, her voice grave. We need to seal this place off. Harris nodded, pulling out his radio to call for immediate backup. I stood there, feeling like the world was collapsing around me. The fear I'd felt was now validated by their expressions. This wasn't my imagination. Something horrific was happening, right in the house I once called home. Soon, an investigative team arrived. Cameras, evidence bags, equipment I couldn't identify. They photographed everything. A tall officer, Detective Carter, asked me to recount the entire incident. I sat in the living room, their flashlights illuminating the darkened house. I told them about the headaches, the dizziness, the strange taste in the food, Serena's suspicious behavior. The noises from the basement, her cold stares, my gut feeling that something was wrong. Carter took careful notes. Do you think anyone in your family is involved? He asked, his eyes sharp. I hesitated. I think it's Serena, I said, my voice trembling. She always forbade me from going to the basement. And the meals. I felt worse after eating here. I paused, thinking of Dad. My dad? I'm not sure, but I don't think he's entirely innocent. Carter nodded without commenting. He told me to stay in touch and promised a thorough investigation. The house was temporarily sealed off with yellow tape. As the police cars drove away, I stood in the front yard, rain soaking my shoulders. I felt a mix of relief. Finally, someone believed me, and dread at the gruesome truth unfolding. My family, or what was left of it, wasn't just broken. It was hiding a dark secret, and I was at its center. That night, I didn't return to my apartment. I drove straight to my mother's house. When I arrived, she and my grandparents were in the living room, bathed in the warm glow of a lamp. I told them everything, from breaking the lock to what I found. Mom listened, initially skeptical, her eyes filled with worry. "Jacob, are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos. When they saw the cloth doll, the jar of blood, my photo on the wall, they were stunned. Grandpa, usually a man of few words, just shook his head, muttering, "I've never seen anything like this." Mom pulled me into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "My boy," she whispered, her voice choked. I sat there in her arms, feeling like a piece of my heart had shattered. Several days passed. I stayed at Mom's house, trying to find some peace. But every time I closed my eyes, the images from the basement flooded back. The cloth doll, the jar of blood, the red symbols. I checked my phone constantly, waiting for news from the police. Carter had promised to follow up, but the waiting made me restless, as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff. Then one morning, my phone buzzed. It was Carter. "Jacob," he said, his voice grave. "You need to come to your father's house now. Your family just returned from their trip. We need you here for a confrontation." My heart pounded. "I'll be right there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom looked at me, eyes filled with worry. "Do you want me to come?" she asked. I shook my head. "I have to do this alone, Mom." She hugged me tightly. As I drove, Portland's sky remained gray. Pulling into the familiar street, I saw Dad's car, suitcases scattered. They were back. I took a deep breath, stepped out. My heart raced so loudly I could hear it. The front door was wide open, and Dad's angry voice echoed from inside. "What is this nonsense?" he roared, clutching his phone. "Who dared to put police tape on my house?" I stepped inside. The air in the living room seemed to freeze. Dad stood there, face flushed with rage. Serena was beside him, blonde hair neatly tied back, but I saw her eyes flicker when she saw me. John and Lily stood in a corner, looking small and confused. "Jacob," Dad said, frowning, his voice lowering but still sharp. "What the hell is going on?" Before I could respond, Serena cut in, her voice icy but controlled. "Richard, I've already called the police," she said. "They said they're sending someone to explain. This must be a mistake. There's no way our house is being treated like a crime scene." Dad waved his phone. "I just spoke to them. They said there was a report from some witness about our basement." Before I could answer, police sirens filled the air. Detective Carter walked in, accompanied by officers Harris and Lopez. Behind them, another investigative team with equipment and stern expressions. "Mr. Samuel Caldwell, Mrs. Serena Caldwell," Carter said, his voice calm but sharp. "We need your cooperation to address some serious concerns regarding this house." Serena smiled, but it was stiff, like a mask. "There must be a misunderstanding, officer," she said, saccharine as ever. "We just got back from a trip. We know nothing about this." Dad nodded, his gaze shifting from me to Carter. "Exactly. I want an explanation right now." Carter didn't respond. He gestured to me. "Jacob, can you tell us what you saw?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of every eye on me. I started speaking, my voice shaky but growing steadier. "I came here to pick up some things and the power went out. I called an electrician and we went to the basement to check. Down there, I found." I paused, locking eyes with Serena, and recounted every detail I'd seen. My voice trembled with tension. The room fell silent, the air heavy. Dad's frown deepened. Serena froze briefly before regaining her composure. "Jacob, what are you talking about?" Dad asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "Are you Making this up for attention, kid. But I didn't back down. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos, and handed it to Carter. He held up the screen for my father and Serena to see. "This is what we found," Carter said. "And we need an explanation from both of you." Serena let out a dry, unnatural laugh. "Officer, these are just spiritual items," she said. "A few things I used to pray for the family's safety. There's nothing dangerous about them." She looked at me, her eyes cold, but still holding that calculated smile. "Jacob, you've misunderstood. I'd never do anything to hurt you." Blood rushed to my face. I stepped forward, facing Serena, my voice shaking but resolute. "You're lying," I said, each word carved from my chest. "What did you do to me?" "The headaches, the fatigue, the strange taste in the food. It was all you, wasn't it? You wanted me to waste away, didn't you?" Dad shot to his feet, face red. "Jacob, that's enough," he shouted. "You don't talk to your stepmother like that. This is nonsense, a stupid prank." But I didn't back down. I looked him in the eyes, feeling for the first time unafraid of him. "Did you know about this, Dad? Or are you part of it, too?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. He froze, his eyes flickering, but he didn't answer. Carter raised a hand, calling for calm. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, we have clear evidence of a ritualistic setup in the basement with items specifically targeting Jacob. This isn't a joke. We need a clear explanation, or we'll have to proceed according to the law." Serena began to deflect, her voice growing frantic. "I told you, it's just for prayers. I don't know anything about pins or blood." But her eyes, filled with tension and panic, betrayed her lie. Dad stood silent, his hands clenched, as if wrestling with himself. I looked at him, hoping for a moment he'd say something, defend me, show me he was still my father. But he just lowered his head. Mute. Suddenly, more police sirens sounded outside. Another investigative team entered, carrying paperwork and an arrest warrant. Carter looked at Dad and Serena, his voice cold as steel. "Samuel Caldwell. Serena Caldwell. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit premeditated murder." Another officer stepped forward, reading their rights, while Lopez and Harris moved in, preparing to cuff them. Serena burst into tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. She struggled, shouting, "You can't do this. I didn't do anything." My father, in contrast, was silent, his face pale, as if his entire world had collapsed. As the police cuffed them, I heard soft sobbing from the staircase. I turned to see John and Lily standing there, eyes red and terrified as they watched their parents being led away. Lily ran to me, hugging me tightly, crying. "Jacob, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. I held her, but I didn't know how to answer. John stood still, fists clenched, his eyes filled with anger and pain. As the police escorted Dad and Serena to the cars, I stood frozen at the door, watching them disappear behind flashing red and blue lights. Serena glanced back, her eyes no longer masking her fury. Dad didn't look at me, didn't say a word. My heart felt crushed, but at the same time, a wave of relief washed over me. The family I'd clung to, that perfect facade, was now revealed as something rotten, steeped in lies and darkness. I stood there under the drizzling rain. Carter patted my shoulder. "You did well, Jacob. We'll keep investigating. Stay in touch." I nodded, but my mind was reeling. The truth was out, but it left a void in me, part loss, part freedom. That night, I drove back to my mother's house. I stayed there for several days. A few days later, the police continued their search. Detective Carter called me. "Jacob, we found some important documents in your father's house. Some of them concern you. We've contacted a lawyer, Mr. Collins, who has worked with your family before. You should meet with him." I gripped the phone, a chill running through me. Documents about me. What other secrets were waiting? The next morning, I met Carter and Mr. Collins at the lawyer's office. Mr. Collins, a man in his 60s with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, had a kind smile, but his eyes carried a gravity that unsettled me. "Jacob, please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. On the desk was a thick file of aging papers. "Jacob," Mr. Collins began, his voice deep and clear. What I'm about to tell you may be hard to accept, but you need to know the truth. He pushed the file toward me, opening it to a page bearing the familiar signatures of my grandparents. This is documentation of a trust fund established years ago by your grandparents, Henry and Eleanor Caldwell. The fund is worth approximately $2 million, and it's in your name. You'll inherit it fully when you turn 25. I sat there stunned. $2 million? The air in the room suddenly felt heavy. I don't understand, I stammered. Why didn't I know about this? Mr. Collins sighed. Your grandparents intended for you to discover it only once you came of age. All documents related to the trust were sent to your legal guardian, your father, Samuel. He's known about it for years. Mr. Collins' words hit me like a knife. My father knew. Serena must have known too. And then, like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place, it all made sense. Everything that had happened had a reason. They wanted me dead. If I were gone, the trust fund would fall to my father, and Serena, with her cunning, would surely find a way to claim it. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, trying to suppress the anger and pain. Carter stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. We've been investigating when Samuel and Serena began planning this. What you found in the basement, combined with these documents, provides strong evidence of their motive. I nodded, but my mind felt numb. My father, the man who once carried me on his shoulders, who taught me to tie my shoes, had chosen money over me. Serena, with her fake smiles and honeyed words, had made me the target of a sinister plot. I felt as if my heart were being torn apart. Yet, at the same time, a cold clarity settled over me. All those years of loneliness, of feeling like I didn't belong in the family, now they made sense. As I left Mr. Collins' office, I carried the trust fund documents and a storm of emotions. On the way back to my apartment, I stopped at a small park, sitting quietly on a bench as memories flooded in. I thought of my childhood, when my grandparents were still alive. Grandpa, with his white hair and warm voice, telling me stories. He taught me how to tie knots, identify plants, and above all, that honesty was the most precious thing. Jacob, live in a way that you're never ashamed of yourself, he'd said, his eyes shining with conviction. Grandma, gentle like a summer breeze, holding me close, singing old folk songs, cooking meals whose smells I still remember. When my parents divorced, it was my grandparents who comforted me. When I was sad, Grandpa would take me to the garden, showing me how to care for plants, as if to say that life goes on, no matter how much it hurts. My grandfather passed away when I was 13, a sudden stroke. A year later, my grandmother followed, leaving a void I could never fill. But now, holding those trust fund documents, I realized they had never truly left me. This $2 million wasn't just money. It was their love, the final shield they left to protect me. Yet, ironically, that same love had become the reason my father and Serena wanted to destroy me. I felt both pain and gratitude. Pain for the betrayal by those closest to me, driven by greed. Gratitude for my grandparents, who even in death found a way to shield me. I felt as if they were watching me, and I vowed not to let greed or betrayal destroy what they believed in me. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened an old photo album my mother had sent me. I flipped to a picture of me with my grandparents, taken during a summer picnic. I was an 8-year-old boy beaming between them, sunlight filtering through the trees. I touched the photo, feeling as if their warmth lingered. I'll live worthy of this legacy, I whispered, my voice choked. I won't let greed ruin what you believed in me. The months that followed were a whirlwind of court hearings and sensational headlines. The trial of my father, Samuel Caldwell, and my stepmother, Serena Caldwell, began just a few months after their arrest. I didn't attend every session. I wasn't sure I had the strength. But I followed along through calls from Detective Carter and brief reports in the local news. The story of the Caldwell family, once a comfortable middle-class household, became the center of public attention. Murder plot in Craftsman home, one headline read. Poison, greed, horrifying secrets in the basement, screamed another. Each time I read those words, it felt like someone was squeezing my chest. The trial dragged on. The photos I took in the basement were shown in court. Experts analyzed the liquid in the glass jar, confirming it was animal blood. The symbols and rituals were complex, tied to an obscure form of occult practice. My testimony, along with Mike the electrician's and Mr. Collins, painted a clear picture. Serena was the mastermind, orchestrating the horrific rituals to harm me. My father, though not directly involved, was found guilty of complicity for knowing about the trust fund and failing to stop Serena. On the day of the sentencing, I sat in my apartment, clutching my phone when Carter called. "Jacob," he said, his voice steady but clear. "The court has reached a verdict. Samuel Caldwell has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Serena Caldwell received 30 years for her role as the mastermind and for carrying out the occult activities." I stayed silent, letting his words sink in. 25 years. 30 years. The numbers echoed, but they didn't bring triumph. Only a deep sadness, as if I'd lost something forever. The Caldwell family, once my father's pride, was now a stain in the eyes of the world. I hung up, sank into a chair, and stared out the window. Rain fell again, as if to wash away what remained of the past. Time passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. I found a stable job at a counseling center, working part-time while preparing for graduate school. The headaches and dizziness gradually faded, as if my body knew the threat was gone. I stayed in touch with John and Lily, but each meeting was marked by their visible pain. They didn't blame me, but I knew they were struggling. I tried to be there for them, but the distance felt unbridgeable. Then came my 25th birthday, 2 years since that horrific discovery. I didn't want a big celebration. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. The kitchen smelled of freshly baked cookies. On the table, a simple chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Jacob." Mom hugged me, her eyes shining with joy, tinged with worry. "You've really grown up," she said, ruffling my hair. My grandparents, though aged, smiled warmly, sharing old stories. I blew out the candles, cut the cake, and laughed with them. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a birthday. It was the start of a new chapter, one free from the weight of the past. The next morning, Mr. Collins called. "Jacob," he said warmly, "today is the day you officially become the legal beneficiary of the trust fund your grandparents left you. $2 million, all yours." He explained the legal details, but I only half listened. My mind drifted to the old days, to my grandparents' garden. Then Mr. Collins handed me a pale yellow envelope. "This is from your grandparents," he said. "They wrote it before they passed, instructing me to give it to you when you turned 25. I took the envelope, my hands trembling. My grandmother's handwriting, soft and elegant, spelled my name on the front. I thanked Mr. Collins, my voice catching. That afternoon, I walked to a nearby park. I sat on a bench, opened the envelope, and began to read. My grandparents' words came alive. "Dear Jacob, you are our greatest joy. No matter how hard life gets, no matter what challenges you face, remember that you are stronger than you know. We left this trust for you not just for a better life, but so you can live true to your heart. Live kindly, honestly, and never let darkness dim the light inside you. Love you forever, Grandpa Henry and Grandma Eleanor." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I smiled. In that moment, I felt a sense of release, as if I'd finally found a home. Not the craftsman house steeped in darkness, but a home within my own heart. My grandparents, though gone, were still with me, guiding me through their loving words. A few weeks after my birthday, a letter arrived at my apartment from the Oregon State Penitentiary. My father's scrolled handwriting. My heart raced. I opened it. "Jacob, I know you don't want to see me, but I need to talk to you one last time as your father. I don't expect forgiveness, but please let me see you. You're still my son. Samuel." Each word pierced like a needle. Father felt foreign. I thought of his indifference, the times he chose Serena, chose money over me. I thought of the basement, the pinned doll, the trust fund they were willing to kill me for. Part of me wanted to tear it up, forget he existed. But another part urged me to face him one last time, not to reconcile, but to close the chapter. I spent sleepless nights. Finally, I decided to go. Not for him, but for myself. I needed to end the past to break the chains holding me back. I called the prison, confirmed the visit, and the next morning I drove there, my heart heavy but my resolve unshaken. The Oregon State Penitentiary. A gray fortress. I passed through security, feeling like I was entering another world. A guard led me to the visitation room, a small space with thick glass. I sat on a hard plastic chair, hands clasped, trying to stay calm. The door on the other side opened, and my father walked in. I barely recognized him. Samuel Caldwell, once exuding authority, now haggard, grayer, gaunt, weary. He wore an orange prison uniform, his hands cuffed, but he tried to hold his head high. He sat down, picked up the phone. "Jacob," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond right away, just stared at him. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice colder than I'd intended. He attempted a weak smile, but it faded. "I just wanted to talk. I want you to know I never meant to hurt you. I let things go too far." His voice faltered, but I felt no pity. His words sounded hollow. "You knew about the trust fund," I said, locking eyes with him. "You knew what Serena was doing, and you didn't stop her." He bowed his head, eyes red, but he didn't deny it. "I was wrong, Jacob," he whispered. "I got caught up in ambition, in what Serena said. I thought she was doing what was best for the family." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Family? You call that a family? You chose her. Chose money over me." He didn't respond. The door on his side opened again, and Serena was let in. My blood ran cold. Her once glossy blonde hair was disheveled. Her face harsh, stripped of that polished facade. Her eyes, cold and venomous, locked onto me. She picked up the phone, her voice still clinging to that fake sweetness. "Jacob, you've misunderstood," she said. "The things in the basement, they were just spiritual rituals. I never meant to hurt you." I stared at her, my gaze unwavering. "Don't call me your son," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You tried to kill me, Serena. Stop lying." She stiffened, lips trembling, but her eyes burned with resentment, as if she hated me for ruining her plans. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice weakening. I stood, setting the phone down. "I didn't come here to hear excuses," I said, looking from my father to Serena. "I came to say I'm done with you both. This family died a long time ago. I'm not your son anymore, and I'm not your family. I'm choosing my own life, and there's no place in it for either of you." I turned and walked out, not looking back. I heard my father call my name, his voice breaking, but I didn't stop. Stepping out of the prison, I breathed in the free air, feeling as if I'd shed a burden carried for years. The visitation room door closed behind me, and I knew it was also closing on my past. From that day forward, I severed all contact with Samuel and Serena. They became part of my past, a scar on my heart, but no longer something that defined me. I focused on the present, on what I could build, and on a dream I'd nurtured for years, becoming a counselor to help young people like me, those who grew up in broken families, find the light within themselves. I enrolled in graduate school. The months that followed were a blur of classes, part-time shifts, and late nights. There were moments of exhaustion, but whenever I looked at my grandparents' letter, carefully tucked into my notebook, I found the strength to keep going. "Live true to your heart," they had written. And I was determined to do just that. The $2 million trust fund was a significant responsibility, but I managed it carefully. A portion covered my tuition and living expenses. Another was invested long-term. I didn't want the money to be just a number. I wanted it to mean something. So I established a small fund in my grandparents' name, the Henry and Eleanor Fund, to support children who, like me, grew up without a complete sense of home. Each thank you letter from a charity felt like an extension of the love my grandparents had given me. With the remaining money, I bought a modest house in the Portland suburbs. Not the craftsman house filled with painful memories, but a cozy place with large windows overlooking a small garden. I painted the walls a soft blue, hung photos of my mother and grandparents, and turned it into a true home. One afternoon, I called my mother, my voice hesitant but full of hope. "Mom, I want you to move in with me. This house, I want it to be our home." There was a pause. Then I heard her laugh, tinged with tears. "Jacob, my boy," she said. "I'll be there." And so she moved in, bringing her old stories, her home-cooked meals, and evenings spent reminiscing. For the first time in years, I felt I truly had a family, not bound by blood, but by love. As the months passed, I found an inner peace. The nightmares of the basement, the cloth doll, the jar of blood no longer haunted me. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night, no longer feared thinking of my father or Serena. Instead, I found joy in simple things, brewing coffee for my mother, an inspiring class, helping a child at the counseling center. My grandparents' memory became a guiding light. Their love, preserved in their letter and old photos, was strong enough to remind me that true love still existed, not from my father or Serena, but from those who chose to love me unconditionally. I also learned lessons no classroom could teach. I realized that blood doesn't always mean love. My father, once my entire world, chose greed over me. Serena, with her fake smiles and dark schemes, taught me that family isn't about shared blood, but about those who make you feel safe and loved. I learned to let go of hatred, not because they deserved it, but because I refused to become like them, consumed by greed or malice. I chose forgiveness, not to erase what they did, but to free myself. My journey came to a quiet close one afternoon as I sat in my small backyard garden, watching wildflowers sway in the breeze. I thought of the boy Jacob, once frightened and alone in that craftsman house, believing he was unworthy of love. That boy had grown up, carrying scars, but also a new belief. The past may leave marks, but it doesn't dictate the future. I smiled, breathed in the fresh air, and felt a new beginning. Not loud or showy, but brimming with hope. In that moment, I knew I had found myself. Not the abandoned son, not the target of a plot, but Jacob Caldwell, a man ready to live with an open heart despite the darkness that once tried to consume me. This story, it felt like my entire life was ripped open and put back together. It's still hard to believe. What would you have done if you found out your own family was capable of something so unspeakable, all for money? Have you ever faced such a deep betrayal, or had to cut ties with someone you once loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to know what you think.